Vince Thompson from Melt with today's Meltdown. Global coverage of breaking news stories across the sports business spectrum, covering FIFA, professional, college, NIL, and everything else there is. Shout out to all of my friends in Atlanta who have been in the professional sports business here for a long time. Atlanta was just named the #1 city to do sports business in, and we've been proud to have been on this scene for 26 years or so. So today, harking back to nearly 26 years ago, and to bring it around back full circle today, we're going to talk about a fella named LeBron James. And while today he is a global icon, one of the most recognized athletes in the professionals in the world, there was a time when he wasn't. There was a time when people may have considered him radioactive. And I say that term with respect because now people forget, because he is the king and arguably the greatest of all time. We can have that argument ad nauseum with about him and Michael Jordan. But be that as it may, in 2003, he was not a household name. And in context, NIL didn't exist with the exception of under-the-table payments as we know it today. So the Coca-Cola Company and their affiliated bottlers made, at the time, in context, was a controversial somewhat decision. The Coca-Cola Company normally doesn't sign a lot of talent. At one time they had Jeff Gordon. One time they had Michael Jordan. One time they had Taylor Swift. But the philosophy, rightfully so, is that first of all, there's never one personality bigger than the Coca-Cola brand globally. And that's arguably, other than maybe an Apple, the greatest brand in the world for 100 plus, 35 plus years. So LeBron James was a fairly well-known high school phenom who was tabbed for greatness, an unbelievable story, grew up with not a lot, moved around a lot, lived in an apartment complex called Spring Hill with his mother, Gloria, and 4 friends, Uncle Rich, Randy, Maverick, and I think there was one other, but let's go with those for a minute. And they sort of formed their own LeBrontourage. But Akron was a great town at one time. Obviously, Firestone had a major presence in there. But LeBron emerged as a tall, 6'8", skinny kid who had an amazing gift of athletics and basketball. Probably would have been a hell of a tight end as well for St. Mary's School. So there was no doubt that he was going to go pro, and there was no doubt that he was going to be the #1 draft choice, and there was no doubt that he was going to be drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, which basically would be considered his hometown. So I was dispatched with, believe it or not, a fellow named Michael Vick and others, John Egan, Coca-Cola Company, John Lewandowski, who was running sports marketing for McDonald's at the time. Michael Vick had an agreement with the Coca-Cola Company and McDonald's. And so Michael was sent up there to recruit. John Egan was sent up there at the time, John Egan was a senior executive with the sports marketing department at Coke. And John Lewandowski ran the McDonald's sports business. And I was the agency, serendipitously, that managed the sideline equipment for Powerade. And so while it was the McDonald's All-American Classic, Powerade sponsored the Slam Dunk. So as fate would have it, I went up there to basically activate that, but also while I was there, John Egan said, "Hey, let's take some notes on LeBron James, and let's see if he's worthy of consideration to be signed." And we were going to see, because there was a recruiting battle within, Nike and Adidas and Coke and Pepsi. Even though he was an unproven 18-year-old, he was a phenom. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. It's a controversy surrounding a gifted Hummer or whatever, which now seems to be child's play in context of what we're dealing with now in NIL. But at the time, it was very controversial. And the story was amazing of where he had come from. And then Michael Vick was going to be a judge of the slam dunk contest. And so my job was to activate the Powerade sideline water coolers and towels and those things on behalf of the McDonald's Coke team, because they actually were funding a part of the All-American Classic. And so I was sort of a bridge between all of those brands in that activation. So we go up there, and it was amazing. Like, LeBron won the slam dunk contest at the McDonald's All-American in the Cleveland Gymnasium. And so it was a raucous environment. They had judges back in the time. Man, I'll never forget, though, this was very poignant. I, not intentionally, but I found myself in line with Gloria James, his mother. And she had no money. Like, I bought her a slice of pizza in this line. And, but she was really, really sweet. And you could just tell she had a sensitivity about her. And you could tell back then, even LeBron sort of had this presence about him that he knew he was channeled for greatness. It was just a, weird sense that I had. So I went back to Atlanta, and Johnny and I gathered our notes, and we told B. Perez, who now is, global chief sustainability officer of the company, but at the time, she was running sports marketing. Her claim to fame had been NASCAR, bringing in the Coca-Cola family of racing and signing NASCAR at the time. But to gain consensus with the talent in any corporation, but particularly Coke, you have to have internal alignment, and you have to have alignment with their Coca-Cola bottling system. So a lot of people don't realize that Mothership really only makes the concoction, the formula, the secret syrup, and they sell it to the bottlers, who are independent businesses, and they make and distribute the product, and the companies work together then on distribution and then how the marketing is done. And that goes all the way back to the 1800s. Dr. Candler did not think that the product had any value in a vessel. It's one of my favorite words, by the way. So anyway, fast forward, buy Glory the Pizza. LeBron wins the contest. John and I go back and make our report to B and say, we think this kid's got, like, if you're going to attach a basically baby brand, which the Powerade had been launched at the 96 Olympics. So in Coke years, 7 years was not a long incubation or shelf life period. And so we were going to use LeBron. There was a couple of reasons. One, so the Sprite brand and the Powerade brand were going to co-sponsor LeBron. And the strategy was on the court Powerade, off the court Sprite lifestyle, Powerade athletic lifestyle. And we were going to bolt on the Powerade brand, and we were going to rise with LeBron's fortunes. And so all of that strategy was great. And so B won with her team and others, executives within the company. Not only did she win the negotiations because she had earned the trust of LeBron and Gloria James, but B had to get the consensus of the bottling community. And there's, 10 or 15 of them control 60, 70% of the distribution. And so, so we signed this kid, and we have this big hubbub and press release and all of that. So I get a call a few weeks later, and they go, "Hey, Benny," which is what they call me then, or some of them call me now still, but hey, we got a problem. I'm like, "Well, what is it?" And I'm like, "Well, we know you just did a promotional poster for Sprite with LeBron in an NBA uniform for the LA All-Star game, which is fine because Sprite was official soft drink of Obey Your Thirst of the NBA. But Powerade was not the official isotonic of the NBA. Obviously, Gatorade was. And they said, we can't photograph LeBron in an NBA uniform and have it affiliated with the brand or the trademarks of Powerade because Gatorade owns those rights. And Gatorade paid a lot for those rights, and Gatorade continues up into the day of 2026 to pay for those rights. And so, but we're hung because nobody thought about it when we crafted the contract based against that carbonated brand and based against that isotonic brand. So they said, what would you do? And I said, well, and this was sort of a hip shot, which is, if you know me, I operate with hip shots. And we had just begun to develop the strategy, cultivation of the strategy for March Madness music back then on the off day and refresh the fans. And I said, well, he fancies himself as a superhero. He already calls himself King James. He's got the tat of King James, and which was sort of bold for an 18-year-old unproven number one draft choice in the NBA. So I said, hell, let's make a comic book. And they go, comic book? And I go, yeah, comic book, like superheroes. And I grew up reading Batman and Superman and all the great DC heroes and Marvel heroes and all that. And, our local general pharmacy in Chatham and still has a soda fountain and all that. And you'd sit there at the base of the wooden stand and flip through the comic books because you couldn't afford to buy a comic book. So you had to sneak it back. And so they go, well, we don't know about that. Who reads these damn things anymore? And I'm like, well, I read them. Well, like, you're not the target. And I go, okay, well, they said, all right, sounds okay. But, I'm getting these polite courtesy nods because I got all these crazy ideas all the time. And so in context, this is 2003. So now you make 3 punches on your phone and you can find the CEO of DC Comics. Back in the day, we had a publication called the IEG Sponsorship Report. And that was, if you were a sports marketer or a sponsorship marketer, that was your Bible. And so I would have an annual subscription to IEG, and it was basically a manual or a wire rim database of everybody in our industry. So I'm like, what the heck am I going to do now? They've asked me to go figure out a strategy on a comic book, and I have no knowledge further beyond the comic book other than I read them. And so, and the lady that was the Powerade brand manager at the time was even more skeptical because she didn't grow up reading comic books, and so she didn't really have a frame of reference that the popularity of comic books. So I'm flipping through the IEG report, and I'm going, please, DC Comics, please be in here. And so, lo and behold, it's in there. And there was a gentleman named David McKillips. Now, fast forward 23 years later, David McKillips not only ran DC, he was a senior executive at Six Flags. He then was hired several years ago to be the turnaround artist of Chuck E. Cheese during COVID. And he is now CEO of Topgolf. And we've been working together that whole time and fast forward. So, but at the time, and in context, people still answered their desk phone, which I know is an antiquated context, but you had a desk phone and your phone rang and if you were there, it was just basically you answered it. That's just what you did. And so it wasn't like anybody would call you on their cell phone because it was about $17 a minute to talk. And no, there was certainly not any text messaging. So I think I still even had an old AOL pager, or a beeper, a pager with, you could type back in like the old timey BlackBerry, but if you want me to date me back that far. So he answers the phone. So you can automatically like he's like, hello, David McKillips. So you already know that he's about to come through the phone. So I go, hey man, you don't know who I am, and I've got this fledgling agency, but I've been asked by the Powerade brand to make LeBron James a superhero. And without hesitation and without pause, he says, I'll be there tomorrow. I go, wait, what? Aren't you in New York? He goes, yeah, I'll be there tomorrow. And my dad lives there, so I can spend the night with him tonight. I need to see him anyway. I'm like, okay, I've never had that response. And I said, well, what are you going to say? He goes, don't worry, I'll handle it. So I go, well, let's meet at world headquarters at 9:30 that morning. And so I immediately call, because I'm like, wow, I got the president of DC Comics. And so I immediately reach out to my Powerade brand manager and said, hey, the guy's coming at 10 o'clock in the morning. They like, what? And you have to understand about also back then, not only Coke, but everybody kept a very rigid schedule. You just didn't do it like we do now, like, hey, let's hop on a Zoom and all that. So I have no idea who I'm meeting. I have no frame of reference. There was no LinkedIn. And so we walk into the headquarters together, shake hands, da-da-da. He had gone to Georgia. And I go, like, he had a backpack on that looked like a military backpack. And I'm like, because at the time you printed out your presentation. And there may or may not have been a projector in the room or whatever. It's nothing like it was 20 years ago. So I go, well, what are you going to present? He goes, don't worry, I got it. I'm like, no, wait, we just met and I'm entrusting you to my biggest client. Excuse me? And so he goes, don't worry, I got it. And so we get in the room. This guy pulls out about an 80-page presentation. First of all, he talked about the power of the comic book. He talked about the power of the dream of a superhero. He talked about how King James, how LeBron thought he was the superhero. And he talked about that the reader of a comic book was also would be the target consumer for Powerade, because although it was known as a sports drink at the time, Rohan Oza, who now is a billionaire, founder of Buy and founder of Poppy, Rohan Oza was the brand manager on Powerade, and he had already had Michael Vick jumping over bridges because the Powerade would give you superhero powers. So unwittingly, this kind of had all tied in through a thread. So David has an 80-page proposal. First, it's backed up by research. Then he rolls in with the storylines. And then he rolls in with saying, we're going to get these famous comic book artists. And then he had these sketches that he had his artists make overnight. Again, in context, this is 2003. And he had one of them, they were just a pencil sketch signed of a silhouette of LeBron, and then it was autographed, and he passed them out to everybody in the room. So about halfway through, I can sense this palpable energy shift, like, wow, this is a huge idea. Hadn't thought of it. So we take a break, and I say, well, let me come in on the other side. A, I wanted a little credit for it. B, I had knowledge of the bottling system, and I had knowledge of what I thought would fill in to the other side. And so I literally had nothing prepared because I had no concept or clue of what David was going to present. So I said, well, hey, let's think about this for a minute. Not only are we going to do this great comic book, we're going to have LeBron in the lab designing a custom Flavor 23 drink in the Coke lab. And the drink would give you superhuman powers. Now, no lawyer today would approve that tacit endorsement that it would give you superhero powers. But again, this is 2003, and there was not as many, I'm not sure Google was around. If it was in a very crude form, shall we say. Because, by the way, in context, I'm still looking up on the IAG manual book. And I said, and then we're going to have the cartoon character, the superhero character, infused in the label, infused in the packaging, infused in the design. We're going to film King James being in the lab mixing this drink. We're going to film these webisodes, because the way it was structured is that King James was trying to be destroyed by the bad guys of the basketball world and the basketball gods. And then we're going to build these beautiful displays. And every time you buy a Powerade, you got a different set of one of these 10 collectible custom comic books. So literally, by then we're into the head nods and the smiling, and this is amazing. And it's going to be pushed out to the bottling system because they're going to help build these displays. And then by then, LeBron was actually beginning to perform, even as an 18-year-old, well on the court. So long story short, we pitched it to Maverick. We pitched it to the Goodwin brothers, who at the time were representing LeBron, and everybody loved it. Universal consensus. So we did two things. We had LeBron down to create Flavor 23, okay? And so we go, LeBron, do you have any special requests? And he goes, yeah, I have three. And we go, okay, what are they? He goes, for my supper or dinner, I want a steak and I want some Fruity Pebbles. We're like, okay. And he said, I want a video game console for the NBA video game because it had just come out and it was the first time he was in the video game and he wanted to play as himself in the video game. So we're like, yeah, sure. So he came down, was amazing. He was amazing. He really just had the sensibility about him. You just tell he's had the sensibility by him. And by the way, his group of Rich, Randy, and Paul and Maverick are still with him now. One of their projects is the TV production company Spring Hill, which was the apartment complex. Maverick is one of the most powerful people in sports, and his agent, Rich Paul, is now one of the most powerful NBA agents in the country. So to say they've done it right is an understatement. My hat's off to them. So we mix it up. Then we had him fly to New York because David had commissioned all these artists to draw the covers of the magazine. So when you go into the DC Comics office back in the day, it was a playground. He just had all these amazing movie posters and pinball machines and everything. So there was a Batman pinball machine in David's office. And of course, I'm like, I want the thing because I'm a huge Batman fan and I'm a huge pinballer, but LeBron wanted it more. And LeBron had more stroke than I did. David shipped him the pinball machine, and LeBron, a few tweaks, approved the covers, approved the content. And it was a fascinating process because these artists, the best ones in the world, like may live in a cave somewhere in Zimbabwe, and they're drawing these covers on the cave walls. I mean, they were a bizarre freak. So I'm going to make a very long story short. In the process of developing the comic book, in the process of developing Flavor 23, then we decided we would have webisodes. So think about that in context, like you're putting a crude set of images in motion on the internet, which then still was what we call dial-up, which, yes, I'm that old. And so my son asked me the other day, like, Dad, what's dial-up? And I'm like, no, I'm not even going to go there, son. So anyway, long story short, we got the webisodes aired. We launched the comic books. We launched the special flavor. We launched the displays. And one last over the piece, B said, well, you can't be a superhero without a super ride mobile, like the Batmobile. And we're like, yeah, well, that makes sense. And we had already integrated a mobile in the comic book. So Bobby Labonte at the time was a member of the Coke racing family, which B had pioneered. And so we converted his car to the King James Mobile, and we raced it at a special track in the world called Bristol Motor Speedway, which you've ever been in there. It's one of the old classic iconic speedways in Bristol, Tennessee. Well, you can't get in there. So we have to chopper LeBron in to the infield in the pit area where he was greeted by the entire Coke family of drivers, and he raced them in a electric car race, and I think he may have won. Then he went to the base of the track at Bristol, and then they look deceiving on television, but it's like at a 33 to 40 degree angle because they're coming off these banks. And we had mounted a basketball goal at the top of that, which he was at the bottom shooting straight up, but it was the equivalent length of a half-court shot. Well, he hits the dadgum thing. So we got this amazing press. We've got it going all over the place. And then the hood of the car is actually in the world of Coca-Cola. So I'm very proud to say that I've got a, display in the, or I've got something in the display in the world of Coke that, not a lot of people can say. And so it was just amazing experience. one of my favorite experiences coming up with a solution to a novel challenge, A, B, just by the stroke of fate and the stroke of the good Lord, like the guy answered the phone. He could have been anywhere. The stroke that he had a father that lived in Atlanta that was overdue to come see anyway. The fact that he graded out and tested well. And we wound up like selling through the Powerade Flavor 23 gift with purchase 3 million comic books. So, 3 million is a lot of anything. The webisode's got thousands of downloads. We made, what was then would have been called an avatar. And today you can get a signed LeBron comic book on eBay for $1,500. And it was a 100% take rate on the product. It was amazing. So it just talks about innovation and heritage and taking that chance and jumping in. So I'm Vince Thompson with The Meltdown, and that's my story today. Have a great one. I'll be back with more later.